Thank you, Father Darren. Eoghan Corry is my name. I'm a nephew of Mary. My uncle Jack was married to Mary. And with Father Darren's permission and with your permission, I'll just talk a little bit about Mary for the next 4.5 minutes or so. She doesn't like being talked about. She probably still doesn't like being talked about, so we better make it nice and brief and to the point. A few people to thank. It was a wonderful Mass from Father Darren Brennan and from Father Blaney last night, who was Father Darren as new to the parish, but I think everyone will agree he did a tremendous tribute to Mary. And Father Blaney, whom was last night, we are very, very grateful. The family are very, very grateful for that lovely service. And also to her great friends in Cloughmills, Anne McNulty and Sally Casey, to those neighbours that she spoke so fondly about. I better stop naming people because I will leave people out. But one thing that strikes me as a visitor to Cloughmills over the last 20 years or so when Mary lived here is how she came to a community where she had no ties, no roots, and she was welcomed in. It's a tribute to Cloughmills, it's a tribute to the parish, and it's a tribute to that old sense of community, that old enduring sense of community that she found here. She found real friendships here. She didn't have any children herself, but in a way her family was all around her here in Cloughmills. Tremendous place, a very welcoming place for my aunt for those last 20 years of her life. Mary was born December the 12th, 1935 in Ina in Clare, and that journey took her from Slieve Callan, the sacred mountain of West Clare, to Slieve Mish in Antrim. As Father Darren said, a tale of 3 cities. Her childhood was probably at a time when there wasn't great material wealth, there was rationing, there was a war, there were all of these things, but Mary wasn't one to complain about it. Took a great spirit from Clare of if you need something done, you do it yourself, get up and go. She was very dedicated to education. She went to the Coláiste Mhuire in Ennis. Her father died at a very young age, and something that always fascinated me was that she ended up travelling to Boston and spending some of her secondary school career in Boston. The notion of coming from Ina in West Clare in the 1940s to sharing a locker room with Olivia Newton-John and John Travolta. She came back from Boston and at 16 years of age was working in Leadmore, in the office in Leadmore Dairies, making ice cream, the empress of ice cream if you like. And into the plant one day came a handsome tradesman called John Corry, Jack, to members of his family. And thus a lifelong romance started. Mary was, at 16, was effectively, from conversations with her, running Leadmore Dairies. I asked her once about this and she said, at 16 years of age, I thought nothing of it. And then she said, young people nowadays, you wouldn't give them the key of the toilet at 16. Mary was very loving and wonderful, but she was also could be ferocious, and her wit was ferocious, and her ferocity was then kept for people like bureaucrats and people who got in the way. Fortunate policeman who stopped her on the Cloughmills Road to tell her car was still registered in London. She was a very kind, loving woman, and had learned from an early age to stand up for herself. And that became important because Jack's health declined. They got married in 1961. They went to live in London. They had a very full social life in London. It was full of social occasions. The Claremont Association in London was pretty central to her life. Jack was a great follower of the greyhounds. He'd kept greyhounds down the years. He knew everything about greyhounds. Mary was nursing greyhounds with the dedication and the care that many people would envy. When Jack fell ill, Mary became a full-time carer. She spent 10 years with all the curtailments on your life that brings. A woman never to complain about it. An example, a shining example to all of us, how when life sends you bad times as well as good, you just roll up your sleeves and get on with it. Moved to Ireland, back to Ireland. Jack died very, very shortly afterwards. And as I say, the last 20 years of her life were here in Cloughmills. When you quantify what Mary Corry lived through from 1935, no electricity in the house growing up, drawing water from a well. What she saw, the changes that she saw, getting Fergal and Tracy's children's photographs on her phone, that level of technological advancement, you just have to sit back with awe at what Mary and her generation have done for us that followed on. I think the phrase that was used was they dug the well and the younger generation, my generation and the generation after us, sucked from it. They gave more than they got back out of life. In the 90s, some of you remember, there was a trend to name generations, Generation X, and Tom Brokaw, the great American newsreader, wrote a book called The Greatest Generation. The newsreader with a very deep voice, some of you might remember him. And Mary fits into that, a generation which didn't see material wealth. They went through hard times, they went through difficulties the next generation, younger people, would balk at, the people that couldn't be trusted with the key of the toilet. And they are here in this church. I think while we pay tribute to Mary and remember her today, it's also a tribute to everyone who passed on, who worked hard, who built up the spirit and the confidence of our people and didn't see the fruits and didn't see the rewards of it themselves, but passed on something that is very precious to the rest of us. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, all of that generation. What do we remember when our loved one dies? The smiling face, the welcoming eyes, the hugs she gave us as a child, the bulging birthdays of surprise, those stories by the winter fire, the knowledge she was on our side, the prayers from which she never tired,